Saturday night, June 16th, 1990. James Edward Pough was driving through Moncrief Park in a faded green Buick. The air was thick, humid, and just another hot Florida night. But what happened next would stain that neighborhood forever. In the space of a few blocks, he opened fire. 4 people were shot. 2 were left dead to die in the street, and 2 more barely survived. And then he vanished. No sirens, no arrests, and no warnings. 2 days later, it was Monday morning. Poe walked into General Motors Acceptance Corporation, or GMAC for short, on Bay Meadows Way. It was around 10 a.m., but he wasn't there for alone. He was armed. In less than 2 minutes, he murdered 9 people, wounded 4 more, and then turned the gun on himself. By the time it was over, police found over 50 spent shell casings. For nearly 26 years, it stood as the deadliest mass shooting in Florida history, and yet, most people don't even remember it happening. Welcome to Morbid Killers, and this is the true story of James Edward Pough. James Edward Pough was born February 16th, 1948, in Jacksonville, Florida. He grew up poor, angry, and almost invisible. His classmates remember him as quiet and isolated. He failed out of high school and drifted from job to job. In the 70s, he was charged with a string of crimes: assault, weapons charges, even murder. But the charges kept getting dropped. A witness recanted, a gun went missing, and James walked. He also got married, but that didn't last. His wife left him after just a few years, citing violent outbursts and constant threats. He never remarried after that. By 1990, James Pough was living alone in a low-rent apartment on West 22nd Street. His car was about to be repossessed, and he had just been fired from his job, and his debt to GMAC, or General Motors Finance Division, had pushed him over the edge. He told neighbors he wasn't sleeping. He was drinking, seeing things, and also talking to himself. And he was also buying guns. The man who would carry out one of the worst mass shootings in Florida history was living 3 blocks away from his first victims, and nobody saw it coming. It was June 16th, 1990, a humid Saturday night in Jacksonville's Moncrief Park neighborhood. Around 11 p.m., James Pough slowed his green Buick near a small town on West 22nd Street. 2 teenagers, Chris Shorter and Lynette Johnson, were sitting on a car out front, waiting on a ride, when Pough pulled up. They assumed that he was just lost. Pough asked them for directions. Chris leaned in to respond, and caught a glimpse of something in the back seat, a semi-automatic rifle just laying there. Before Chris could react, Pough pulled a revolver from his lap and fired. Chris was hit in the shoulder, and Lynette, just 18 years old, she took a bullet to the chest and another to her back, but somehow they both survived. But Pough wasn't done. Minutes later, he found Louis Carl Bacon, a known local pimp, and Doretta Drake, a woman known for her line of work around the area. They were standing on a nearby corner, just blocks from where Pough lived. He shot them both with an M1 carbine, execution style. No words and no warning. Both died on the scene. 4 victims, 2 dead and 2 clinging to life. But no one connected the dots. No manhunt, no alerts, and no arrests. Police would later admit they knocked on Pough's door the next day. But when no one answered, they just left a card. And by then, Pough was already planning Monday. That Monday morning, at 10 a.m., James Edward Pough pulled into the parking lot of the General Motors Acceptance Corporation. It was a quiet corporate office tucked inside Bay Meadows Way, a financial arm of General Motors. They handled loans, repossessions, and debt collection, and they had hounded James Pough for months over a $6,000 car loan, a car he no longer even owned. Neighbors said Pough had been up all night, pacing, muttering to himself, and rehearsing something. When he finally left his West 22nd Street apartment, he took everything with him. He walked into GMAC's front lobby with a semi-automatic rifle in one hand and a .38 revolver in the other. He didn't speak, he didn't hesitate. He just aimed his gun and opened fire. His first victim was Julia White Burgess, age 42. She wasn't an employee. She was a mother, in the lobby just to make a car payment for her son. She died instantly. Next was Drew Woods, 38. A credit representative, shot in the chest and back. He collapsed in the hallway. Cynthia Perry, 30. She was shot while running for cover. She died near her desk. Barbara Duckwall Holland, 45. She had worked there for nearly 20 years. Shot in the back as she tried to escape. Janice David, 40. A supervisor in claims and collections, found slumped behind a file cabinet. Sharon Louise Hall, 45. She was gunned down in the accounting wing. Denise Sapp Heifel, 36. She had been with GMAC for 7 years. Poe shot her in the stomach. She didn't survive. Lee Simonson, 33. Customer relations manager. He tried to shield a coworker when he was shot. And then finally, James Edward Pough turned the revolver on himself. One shot, straight to the head. In under 2 minutes, he fired at least 50 rounds. 9 dead and 4 more injured. After the shots were fired and the killer was dead, the people who did survive started to look around. David Hendricks, shot but conscious. Nancy Dill, wounded and dazed, crawling to safety. Jewel Bellotti, hit, bleeding, but alive. Phyllis Griggs, barely escaped with her life. They were found huddled, bleeding, some hidden beneath desks, others trapped under bodies. The GMAC office was a war zone. The walls, the floors, the air, soaked in blood and silence. 911 was already ringing off the hook. Calls came in from nearby offices, survivors who escaped, and neighbors who heard the gunshots. Police stormed the building minutes later, but it was too late. They found James Edward Pough slumped in a chair, gun still in his hand, one self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He never planned on leaving. His body was surrounded by shell casings, spent magazines, and dead silence. In a quick amount of time, he had turned a finance office into a graveyard. The crime scene was so gruesome, some first responders had to step out. One officer would later say it looked like a slaughterhouse. This, at the time, officially was the deadliest workplace shooting in Florida history. So what had caused this? James Edward Pough wasn't just angry. He was unraveling for quite some time. And no one, not his neighbors, not his coworkers, no one saw the full storm that was coming. He was 42, lived alone, worked odd jobs, including a stint as a night watchman. He had a quiet, brooding presence. But underneath that stillness was decades of buried rage. He had a criminal record: assault, vandalism, gun charges. In 1971, he shot a man during an argument in a grocery store parking lot. Poe claimed it was self-defense, and the charges were dropped. But that wouldn't be the last time he reached for a gun. He was drowning in debt. His car had just been repossessed by GMAC, the same office he would later turn into a slaughterhouse. He had also recently lost his mother, and reportedly his grip on reality. A friend said he became paranoid, withdrawn, and stopped speaking to people, started lashing out at shadows. In the days before the massacre, he bought 2 semi-automatic pistols, even though he was legally barred from owning firearms altogether. But the rage was building, and the walls were closing in, and James Pough made his plans and kept his word, following through with what he planned. In the final days before the massacre, James Pough started tying up loose ends. He wasn't impulsive, he wasn't methodical. Every move was calculated. First he canceled his phone service, then sold his TV. He then gave away most of his belongings and paid off debts with the little money that he had left. Then he bought those 2 guns, the ones he legally wasn't even allowed to. But in Florida at the time, no background check was required for private sales. He practiced at the local gun range. One witness said he looked calm, too calm. And on the night of June 17th, 1990, he stepped outside his apartment and began his killing spree, murdering Louis Carl Bacon and Doretta Drake. But that wasn't his finale. That was just his rehearsal. By sunrise the next morning, James Pough would become a name burned into Florida's history. That Monday morning, Jacksonville woke up to sirens and body bags. The news hit like a bomb. A finance office turned into a war zone. 9 innocent lives gone in minutes. 4 more shot or clinging to life. Across the country, headlines exploded. Bloodbath at loan office. Shooter had criminal past. No motive known. People demanded answers. But the answers, they weren't comforting. GMAC quietly confirmed what many feared. James Pough's car had been repossessed just days before. He blamed them. He hated them. And now they were dead. The building was clean, renovated, and it reopened. But obviously, it was never the same. Trauma haunted that office. Some employees never returned. Others couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't forget the tragedy that had just occurred. And the bigger question loomed. How did a man with a criminal record get his hands on 2 guns? No answers came, just more funerals. Pough's death meant no trial, no cross-examination, no justice, no motive, only silence. Just pure, cold silence. James Edward Pough never left a note. No manifesto, no statement, just carnage. He wasn't trying to be famous. He wasn't trying to make a point. He was just done. But the people he destroyed, they had lives, families, futures. And for what? A repossessed car, a lifetime of bitterness, just because he was pissed off? A man who never asked for help and wouldn't have accepted it, even if he did. To this day, his name barely echoes through true crime history. No Netflix doc, no trending hashtags, just a whisper in Florida's past. But the ones who remember, they never forget. The survivors, the families, the first responders who walked into the room and saw what he left behind. He didn't want attention. He just wanted control. And in those final 5 minutes, he took it. The only way he knew how. Hello everyone. If you made it this far, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the first rendition of Morbid Killers. This one was pretty crazy. I had no previous knowledge on this case, so covering it was pretty cool. If you guys found this one interesting, as always, feel free to like, comment, and maybe even consider subscribing. We post new videos every Tuesday and Fridays around 6 to 8 EST. If you guys have any suggestions or any recommendations for anything, just drop it in the comments and I'll get to it there. With that being said, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.